Wow, look at this stuff,
I said, crouching in the dusty building to look at the odd knickknacks arranged in a crude approximation of a shrine. Beams of sunlight shone through holes in the roof, dust motes floating lazily through them. Heavy footsteps approached, shaking the rickety structure as Largo stepped beside me.
Looks like some sort of shrine,
I said, looking up at my tall friend.
Dude,
Largo said, reaching one thick and clumsy hand out toward a human-like figurine that looked to be made of twisted plant roots.
Don't touch it,
I said, but it was too late. Largo yanked the thing from its perch and brought it up to his earnestly handsome face, his thick lips parting as his green eyes widened. I looked over at Kyler, whose face was obscured by the camera he held in both hands. Looking directly into the camera, I made a frightened face that I hoped said, "This guy's going to be the death of us."
Man, this shit is boring,
Largo said, chucking the figurine back at the shrine, knocking a couple of onyx-colored rocks off. I winced, stepping back from the shrine.
Seriously, man, stop. You don't know what you're messing with.
Largo gave me an insolent look and then used one thick hand to swipe a shelf of knickknacks to the floor. Candles, shriveled chicken feet, and rocks with strange symbols carved into them clattered to the dusty wood-planked floor.
Don't tell me you believe in that shit,
Largo said. I kept my mouth in a shocked O, my eyes fixed on the floor at my feet, as though the knickknacks had been a priceless vase that now lay shattered there. In my peripheral vision, I saw Kyler getting closer with the camera. When I didn't answer, Largo laughed and knocked the rest of the shrine to the floor. He stomped on the items, still laughing, until a loud bang sounded from outside, like someone smashing the side of the old wooden building with a baseball bat. We both froze and looked at each other, Largo's expression now matching mine. The bang came again. Both of us flinched. Kyler moved closer with the camera. A flurry of shoulder-tensing bangs erupted from outside. Largo and I yelled. Glass shattered.
Okay, cut.
Kyler shouted, lowering the camera.
That was great.
The banging stopped, and the other two members of our crew came through the front door of the old building. Milo, a fuzzy-headed 18-year-old with thick glasses and an ingratiating attitude, held two claw hammers in his hands. Haley, a 25-year-old with small eyes, an upturned mouth, and an outspoken personality, held an aluminum baseball bat in her hands.
Good?
Haley asked.
Yup,
Kyler said.
Now we'll do the shot of you running down from the other side of town. After that, we'll need to get ready for the first kill. It's a good thing we only needed one take for that one,
I said.
because Largo really smashed some of these things to bits.
Everyone looked at Milo, who had supplied the knickknacks. He shrugged.
That's what I made them for. I knew they would get beat up. You want to save any of them?
Largo asked.
Yeah, maybe so,
Milo said, setting his hammers down on a dusty table and coming over. While Milo and Largo worked, Kyler, Haley, and I went outside. It was getting chilly as the afternoon morphed into evening. Gray, rainless clouds obscured the sky over the ghost town, giving the place the feel of winter, which was still several months away. I studied the ramshackle buildings of the once important mountain town. We still hadn't decided which one or ones to use for the night shoot when the ghost would come after us. Not that it mattered that much which ones we chose. The place was genuinely creepy. I just hoped that creepiness translated to the screen. It had taken us nearly 2 hours to hike up to the ghost town. The dirt road had been washed away by a flash flood years earlier. That, combined with a 3-hour drive to get as close as possible, meant that to finish the shoot in a timely manner, we would need to camp out here for at least one night, and maybe 2. I wasn't super jazzed about that, but I had to admit it would give the finished product the kind of realism that was hard to fake without backing from a major studio. We were just 5 people with a camera and a YouTube channel called Abandoned Haunts. It was a growing YouTube channel, but certainly not one with big bucks to throw at our productions. Not yet, at least. What do you think? I asked Kyler. Where should we do it? Kyler shrugged, studying the buildings just as I had. There were 2 rows of them on either side of the main dirt thoroughfare. Many of them looked too dangerous to set foot inside, with half-collapsed roofs or walls that sagged drunkenly. But there was still a good dozen buildings to choose from, at least ones that looked safe enough to shoot inside of. We'd have Milo, our resident nerd, inspect them first to make sure they were actually safe. Milo was good at that kind of stuff. It was why we'd hired him.
"We should do the final sequence in the mine,"
Haley said, pointing up toward the mine shaft carved into the mountain.
That would be really tempting fate,
Kyler said.
especially with all those boards over the entrance saying danger and keep out, don't you think?
Haley waved his concern away.
"I'm sure they legally have to put that junk up, so whoever owns it has his ass covered. I bet it's fine. Besides, we can have Milo look at it."
Milo looking at a building is one thing,
I said.
It's entirely different in a mine shaft. He's not a structural engineer.
"He's close enough, though,"
Haley said. I grimaced at that. I had a hard enough time entrusting my life to an eccentric 18-year-old when I stepped inside wooden buildings that could collapse on me at any moment. Stepping into a mine shaft was a whole other thing. We both looked at Kyler, who was the director, and therefore had the final say. He brushed away a lock of greasy, wind-stirred black hair inside.
Haley, why don't you look for a good place for us to sleep tonight? Heath, see if you can find a creepy building from when the ghost first attacks. I'll talk to Milo about the mine.
Haley and I shared a look. I snarled at her, and she stuck her tongue out at me. It was all in good fun. We chuckled and then went our separate ways to do our assigned duties. As the sun moved toward the horizon on the other side of the mountain, the sky grew a little darker, and the wind blew a little harder. The place we settled on for the first kill was an old sawmill at one edge of the little town. There had once been a creek that the mill had been built over to harness the energy of running water, but the creek was gone now. It had either been diverted or had dried up. Maybe that was one reason the town had been deserted. I didn't know, but I made a mental note to ask Milo about it. He was the one who scouted locations. The reason I suggested the mill was because it had a square wooden tunnel in which we could shoot. Given the tracks on the tunnel floor, I figured it had been used to transfer logs down the adjacent hill to the sawmill, where they would then be cut into boards or shaved into wood pulp. A section of the tunnel had collapsed sometime in the last 50 years when a tree fell on it, which made me smile. I thought of the tree giving its own life to smash the mill, maybe getting revenge for all its tree brethren that had been chopped up in the mill over the years. From the looks of it, the tree had fallen on the tunnel after the town had been abandoned, but it was still a funny thought. That collapsed section made inside the tunnel the perfect place for the scene, because it blocked any light from coming through from the other side. I told Kyler and Milo about it, and Milo went to check it out, while the rest of us got the scene of Haley running down from the other side of town, looking concerned. Then we shot the scene of Largo and I running out of the old building and meeting Haley, looking around for any source of the banging and seeing nothing. Kyler said we would have to figure out how to get our characters from the old building up to the sawmill for the first ghost attack. This was how we worked. We let the location dictate the story, got the major beats down, and then went and filled in any blanks. As we discussed it, it became clear to me that we would probably be here for 2 more days, which was okay because we'd brought supplies for 3. As we finished the final take on the scene, Milo came up and said the sawmill looked good.
I've already moved our pads up there for Heath's kill scene. All right,
Kyler said, looking at the dimming sky.
Let's do it, and then make camp for the night. Did you find a place, Haley?
"There's that old warehouse up the road that looks pretty sturdy. We'll still probably want to set up our tents because there are holes in the roof, but it should help cut the wind."
Fine with me,
Kyler said.
What about everyone else?
Sure, I said, shrugging.
Yeah,
Largo said. Milo opened his mouth to speak, but Kyler was already moving on.
Okay, great. Let's get this done, people. Largo, could you please move our gear into the warehouse and then meet us at the sawmill?
Largo nodded and headed off to move our backpacks while the rest of us headed up toward the sawmill. According to our loose, skeletal script, I would be the first to die by the ghost that Largo had pissed off by smashing all that black magic stuff in the old building. Of course, our audience knew it was all fake. Well, all except the abandoned locations we explored. But that extra dash of storytelling entertainment gave a little flavor to what had become a dull genre of urban exploration. So in the sawmill, I put a vest on under a jacket identical to the one I'd been wearing in every scene thus far. The only difference was that this jacket had a slit up the back and could be fastened with Velcro. Milo attached a rope to a grommet on the back of the vest and then Velcroed the back of my jacket closed around it. From the front, you wouldn't be able to see the rope at all. Largo and Milo would hide back in the tunnel with the rope in their hands, and when the time was right, after I said, "There's something in here with us," they would pull on the rope and yank me back into the dark tunnel. I would land on our gathered sleeping pads, which we would take out with clever visual effects during editing. From the camera's point of view, it would look like I was being yanked off my feet and back into the dark tunnel by some invisible being. At least, that was the plan. We never got to do the scene, because all hell broke loose before we had a chance. Kyler was busy setting up the camera, while Haley asked him about the next scene, which would be her and Largo's reaction shot. Largo was still off moving our stuff, and we couldn't do the scene without him.
So there are no pieces of wood with nails sticking out of them around where I'm going to land, right?
I asked, as Milo double-checked the rope attached to my back.
No,
Milo said.
I checked, but you can double check if you want. No,
I said.
I trust you. We're good. Just had to ask. Well, now you've got me second-guessing myself,
Milo said.
I'm going to go check and make sure the sleeping pads are in optimal position. Can't have the talent getting hurt.
I chuckled at that as Milo turned on his flashlight and headed into the sawmill tunnel behind me. I jumped up and down a few times and stretched my neck to get ready for the yank. Largo sometimes didn't know his own strength. I flinched as a sickening scream boomed from behind me. There was a crash, the sound of rotting wood breaking, and I turned around to see Milo's flashlight rolling down toward me.
Very funny, Milo,
Haley said. I looked from the dark tunnel to Haley, who stood near Kyler, apparently not impressed with the little joke. Kyler had his attention fixed on the camera, which didn't surprise me at all. He would film paint drying if he thought he could make a YouTube video out of it. When I heard nothing else from Milo, I turned to look back into the tunnel. The flashlight had come to rest against one of the metal tracks, pointing directly toward me, making it even harder to see into the tunnel.
That was a pretty good scream,
I said.
Maybe now Kyler will reconsider and let you go on camera.
The only answer was a gust of wind creaking the sawmill. But I soon saw movement. Someone was pulling on the other end of the rope that was currently attached to my vest. Milo had already put the other end of it behind a large wooden board he had propped up to hide him and Largo when they did the pull. I thought it had been overkill before because I couldn't see the board in the darkness. I certainly couldn't see it now with the flashlight beam in my face. I laughed nervously. It wasn't like Milo to pull pranks. I couldn't remember a single time he had.
Pretty freaky,
I said.
You got me.
The rope continued to disappear into the darkness, all the slack coming out of it. But I knew that Milo wasn't exactly a strong kid. I doubted he could pull me off my feet like Largo could. So I braced myself and prepared for a game of tug-of-war, grabbing the rope in both hands. The rope went slowly taut, but there was no tug. Not for a long moment. I pulled a little, testing it. Then there was a tug, so violent and hard it caught me off guard. The rope pulled out of my hands and yanked me around so my back was facing the tunnel. I looked into Haley's eyes and said, "It's not Milo." Then I was pulled off my feet, landing hard on my ass in the middle of the tracks, not anywhere near the side of the tunnel where the sleeping pads were set up. A column of pain shot up my tailbone as Haley darted toward me, shouting for Kyler to help. Kyler moved closer, but he was recording, and I didn't think he would be much help. It occurred to me that Largo and Milo could have devised this little scheme. Maybe even Kyler too, but I didn't think it was likely. Safety was always a big priority, and the violent way in which I'd been pulled off my feet made me doubt that it was my friends doing this. I could have easily hit one of the metal tracks and broken a bone. As Haley darted over, I got my legs under me and lurched toward her, but I was pulled off my feet again. This time, I did hit the track with one butt cheek, crying out as I tumbled off. I flopped onto my stomach, the fear really digging its claws into me now. I had no doubt. This wasn't Largo. This wasn't Milo. This was something else. Gripping the rail and one of the ties, I barely managed to hang on when the third tug came. Haley reached me and yanked on the rope, getting just enough slack to detach the D-clip from my vest. We both watched as the rope and the attached D-clip zipped off into the darkness. Haley jumped over, grabbed Milo's flashlight, and shined it into the darkness. All we saw was the large board Milo had set up. The flashlight shook in Haley's hand.
Milo?
Then Largo's voice came from behind us.
What's up?
Both Haley and I whipped our heads around to look at him. Kyler turned the camera and pointed it at the big man's face. Then he turned back and focused on the dark tunnel.
Where's Milo?
Largo said, looking confused.
What happened?
I scrambled to my feet and grabbed Haley by the arm, dragging her backward toward Largo and Kyler.
There's something back there,
I said.
Something took Milo.
Largo looked at Kyler, who seemed to be putting it all together now that Largo was here. He lowered the camera, but still kept it pointed toward Haley and I.
Wait,
Kyler said to Largo.
that wasn't you? What wasn't me?
Largo asked, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth.
You guys are fucking with me, right? I don't remember this in the script.
I stared into the dark tunnel. Haley kept the flashlight pointed that way, like it was a weapon.
Don't mess with me right now.
Kyler said.
You didn't have anything to do with this?
Largo shrugged, the faint beginnings of a smile fading.
I really don't know what you're talking about. Seriously.
Kyler turned away from the big man and shouted into the tunnel.
Milo?
Wood groaned as a part of the tunnel shifted. Then the sound of wood snapping erupted as part of the tunnel collapsed. We ran. All four of us ran out of the sawmill, going as fast as we could while dodging the debris littering the ground. The groaning and snapping seemed to follow us, but by the time we got out into the fading daylight and reached a vantage point from which we could see the outside of the tunnel, the destruction had stopped. The tunnel lay collapsed right up to the building. Juvenile pine trees that had sprouted up around the tunnel cast ominous shadows around the collapsed tunnel's exterior. And with every gust of wind, I was sure I saw some horrible dark beast lurking in those shadows.
Milo!
Largo shouted.
Where are you?
His voice seemed weak as the wind ripped it away and sent it careening down the valley. He turned to us and said,
What the hell happened? Someone talk to me.
Kyler lifted the camera and messed around with the controls until he brought up the footage from inside the mill. He showed it to Largo. Haley and I squeezed in, hoping to see something, some clue that would tell us this was all a hoax. We couldn't see what had happened to Milo, both because of the darkness and because Kyler hadn't exactly been focusing the camera on that area. But hearing the snapping wood and Milo scream from the camera's tiny speakers left no doubt in my mind that it wasn't a hoax. Largo watched intently, seeing how I was yanked off my feet and into the tunnel, and the ensuing heroic rescue by Haley. When it was done, Largo shook his head.
Milo couldn't do that. No way.
We all looked up at the shadow-shrouded tunnel.
Maybe he's still in there,
Largo said. Before anyone could agree or disagree, he started up the slope toward the collapsed tunnel.
Wait,
Haley said.
we need to think about this. I mean, someone's here with us.
Largo kept moving.
Yeah, well, he hasn't met me yet.
We watched him move up the slope, sharing uneasy glances with each other. Slowly, Kyler raised the camera and hit record.
What are you doing?
I hissed.
This isn't funny. You're goddamn right it isn't.
Kyler said.
Which is why I'm recording every bit of it. Maybe it'll be used as evidence one day against whoever the asshole is that hurt Milo.
Or maybe someone will find it after we're all dead and know that some messed up stuff happened to us.
Haley said. Kyler and I looked at her, and with her words, I realized just how alone we were out here. Our cell phones didn't get service, so there was no way to call the cops. Even if we did have service, the nearest town was over 4 hours away, if you included the 2-hour hike from the nearest usable road. We were out here alone, with no one to rescue us, and only our wits standing in the way of whoever was out there in the dark. I looked at the ramshackle town, wanting to just go. But I knew we couldn't leave without figuring out if Milo was in the wreckage from the tunnel. Maybe he was still alive. Maybe this was somebody trying to scare us. Maybe someone got wind of our trip up here and decided to scare the scarers. I could only hope. Soon, Largo was up among the small trees on the rocky slope. He'd found a sturdy-looking stick from somewhere and held it like a baseball bat as he approached the pile of wood that had been the tunnel.
Milo?
He called. His voice sounded so little thanks to the wind and the distance. He poked around at the wood and kept calling out for Milo as he made his way up to the shack-like structure at the top of the tunnel. The shack had been built on a patch of flat land. My guess was they stored the logs in there, out of the elements, until the workers in the mill were ready for them. Then, they loaded up logs on carts and sent them down to the mill while other workers brought more logs to the shack from what had once been a lush, old-growth forest at the top of the small mountain. The shack was still standing, although leaning precipitously to the left. As Largo approached the shack, Haley called up to him.
Don't get out of sight!
Largo looked back at us and yelled,
I gotta check the other side.
Wind blew a chill through me, and along with it came the feeling that I would never see Largo again if he went around the shack to check the other side of the collapsed tunnel. Even though the tunnel no longer stood, the pile of wood was high enough to obscure even someone as tall as Largo.
Wait!
I called.
I'm coming up!
I could barely believe the words as they came out, but I realized after a moment of shock that I meant them. I couldn't bear to see Largo disappear around that leaning shack alone, so I volunteered myself despite the fear currently gripping my heart with razor-tipped claws. Not that it mattered, because Largo waved my declaration away and shouted,
Stay there!
Then he was gone from sight, around the corner of the shack. We all stared up at the building, although Kyler did so through the camera and waited. Largo called out for Milo again, which eased my fear fractionally. I looked at the craggy mountaintops that created the backdrop to the sawmill. A ceiling of clouds moved massively overhead, the sheer scale of them and the speed of their movement making me momentarily dizzy. The shadows were solidifying, taking over the landscape as the sun continued its descent. There would be nothing but absolute darkness soon. I thought about our camping gear in the old warehouse down in the town. That was where we had our lanterns and warm clothes. We would need them soon. Very soon.
Help!
The word was so little, so brief, as if the wind stole it from my ears before it could really seat itself there. It was Largo. He sounded terrified. I'd never heard him sound like that before. Then there were the sounds of a scuffle. At least I thought that's what they were. It was hard to tell what was real and what my mind was conjuring up from the wind.
Largo?
Haley called.
What's wrong?
There was no answer, but I swear I could hear distant thuds that were whipped away on the wind. The three of us just stared up as the shadows edged closer, their tendrils close to touching, to joining. A minute or more passed before any of us spoke again.
What do we do?
Haley asked.
I don't know,
Kyler said. Then he shouted,
Largo! Answer me!
Somewhere in the distance, a raven squawked.
I'm going up there,
I said, but I didn't start forward. I wanted one of them to tell me no, to talk me out of it. Something came flying through the air from the other side of the collapsed tunnel. It arced high, rotating slowly as it grew closer. I didn't move because I knew it wouldn't land near enough to pose a threat to us, but I bent forward at the waist and squinted, trying to see what it was. A rock? A misshapen ball of some kind? Just before it hit the ground amid some rocks and shrubs about 15 yards away, I realized with terrible certainty that it was Largo's severed head. Suddenly, the distant thuds I thought I'd heard made sense. Even though I was certain I was correct about the object, I found myself rushing up the slope to where it landed. A grim and tentative hope was alive somewhere inside me, and I clung to it, still eager to prove that this was some hoax. And if it was, the severed head would be nothing more than a prop. It didn't take me long to find it. Without thinking, or perhaps still hoping it would be a prop, I reached down and retrieved the head from where it had come to rest between a couple of steel-colored rocks. The blood was still warm, the head heavy, and undoubtedly real. I felt Largo's hair under my fingers as I turned the head to face me. I felt his ear, and the cartilage flexed just like it would on a real head. His teeth had been damaged, whether from the throw or before that, I had no way of knowing. One of his eyes was closed, the other one was open and filled with blood. Staring down at my friend's head in the fading daylight, I turned around and walked stiffly back down to Kyler and Haley. They were both asking me things, talking to me in frightened tones, but I only heard incoherent sounds. When I got close enough, I held out the head toward them. Haley screamed. Kyler bent over and vomited. "It's really him," I said, staring down at the head. "Someone chopped off his head." Haley turned and ran back into the ghost town, surely headed for the trail down the mountain. Wiping his mouth, Kyler called after her, but she didn't slow. I stared down at the head, only vaguely aware of these events until Kyler put a hand on my wrist.
Put it down, Heath.
He said in a soft, kind voice.
Just put it down right here.
I nodded.
Yeah.
I put the head down and wiped my bloody hands on my pants. Kyler grabbed me by the arm and pulled me along with him, heading the way Haley had gone. I was ripped back to my senses as Haley screamed from somewhere in the darkness below. Haley came tottering out of the warehouse we were going to make camp in as Kyler and I came sprinting up. She didn't look injured, but it was getting darker every minute, and I couldn't see her clearly.
Our stuff is gone,
she said in a sob.
We're gonna die out here.
Without a word, Kyler moved into the abandoned warehouse, turning on the crappy little light he had attached to the camera. I followed behind him and saw that what Haley said was true. Our packs were gone, and there were gouges in the floor that hadn't been there before. "Are those claw marks?" Kyler asked. "We need to go," I said.
Guys!
Haley shouted. We rushed back outside and found Haley looking up the valley toward the sawmill.
What?
Kyler asked.
I saw something,
Haley said, pointing a finger up toward a half-collapsed building on the opposite side of the dirt thoroughfare. Kyler shifted the camera, shining the light toward the building. My bones turned to ice as my eyes picked out a strange figure out of the rubble. It looked to me like a cross between a bear and a man, although it didn't have any fur, only pale, sickly, and saggy skin over its formidable but oddly melted-looking body. It was only there for a moment, moving just a split second after the light touched it, and it moved fast, disappearing back beyond the piles of rubble and into the darkness.
Did you see that?
Haley asked. "Its eyes," I said. "Did you see its eyes?" They were yellow and black, the irises diamond-shaped. Yet, foreign as they were, they seemed somehow familiar to me. "This isn't happening," Kyler said. "What the fuck was that?"
It was big.
Haley said.
Big as a person.
"Those eyes," I said. There was a thud from behind us, followed by a strange shriek that shattered my frozen bones. Suddenly, all three of us were running through the ghost town, toward the trail that would eventually lead to Kyler's SUV. We ran as fast as we could, but I was certain that something was chasing us. And as soon as I found out, I was right. "Stop!" I gasped, gripping the stitch in my side as I stumbled to a stop, huffing, lungs feeling 2 sizes too small. Haley heeded me, putting her hands on her knees as she tried to catch her breath. But Kyler, who had run track in college, kept going. I watched the camera light bounce down the wooded trail as he ran, shouting over his shoulder for us to keep up. We had left the ghost town behind, but not far behind. I figured we were maybe 50 yards into the woods, which meant we'd sprinted over 100 yards. That was pretty good for someone like me, who hadn't run since gym class in high school. Then again, when you think a murderous creature is chasing you, it's not hard to push yourself. I shouted for Kyler to stop and wait for us, but it came out weak. I was still trying to catch my breath. So as I watched his light grow smaller, illuminating the trees that crowded the trail, I dug into my pocket and pulled my phone out. With shaking hands, it took me a long moment to find the flashlight app, and when I did, I spun around in a circle, shining the light, looking for yellow eyes with diamond-shaped irises in the woods. I found none, and I didn't see anything following us along the trail. Haley crowded close to me, still huffing and puffing. I looked down the trail and shouted,
Kyler, stop!
The light was still visible, but it looked like Kyler was rounding a bend in the trail, putting trees between us and him. It didn't look like he was stopping. Suddenly, the light shot up a few feet into the air and then fell to the ground before coming to rest, shining back toward us along the trail. All I could see was the light now. I couldn't see Kyler anywhere. My throat clicked as I swallowed.
Kyler? What happened?
Haley asked.
Did he trip?
I wanted to believe that's all that had happened, but I didn't think so. I looked over my shoulder, back up the trail, then back down toward the camera light. It still hadn't moved.
Shit,
I said.
Kyler!
Haley screamed. We looked at each other, and I noticed that she'd pulled her phone out and had her flashlight on now too.
You have service?
Haley looked at her phone and shook her head.
You?
No, I said. We both stared at the camera light. It still hadn't moved.
Maybe he dropped it and kept running,
I said.
Without a light?
Haley said. I looked over my shoulder, shining the light back behind me. Now that we were tucked deeper into the valley, the wind wasn't so bad. But it still rustled the tops of the trees, creating a constant soundtrack of distant movement. Do we go back? I asked finally. Haley hesitated for a moment before saying,
No way. We gotta get back to the car.
Kyler has the keys, I said.
I guess we have to find Kyler.
We started forward, but Haley ducked over and grabbed a heavy fallen branch from the ground. Thinking that was a good idea, I grabbed a wedge-shaped rock with a pointed edge. We eased forward together, taking turns looking behind us and into the woods on either side. Before we'd gone 10 yards, the sides of my head around my ears started to feel sore because I was straining to listen so hard. The rustling treetops, I knew, would make it difficult for us to hear something approaching, unless it was being really loud. We would only hear it when it got close, and I wasn't at all confident in my ability to use the rock gripped tightly in my right hand. We paused 5 yards from the camera and shined our lights around, looking for any sign of Kyler. It was hard to see beyond the camera, because the bright light was still on, shining in our faces. Our phone flashlights were no match for the camera light.
Kyler?
Haley called out. No answer. I stepped forward, shoved my phone in my pocket with the flashlight still on, and picked up the camera. As I aimed the device down the trail, the light picked out a figure floating above the trail. No, floating wasn't right. Hanging. As comprehension spread through my brain like poison, I stepped involuntarily back, unable to take my eyes off the figure. It was Kyler. He'd been strung up over the trail, arms outstretched and fastened to adjacent trees with ropes. His legs were fastened together and also tied to trees on each side of the trail. At first, I thought it was another rope that hung from him in dripping loops, but my mind corrected me with a silent scream that said they were intestines. His intestines. They emerged from under the hem of his shirt, so I couldn't see the wound that was surely there. I was distantly thankful for this small mercy. The trail beneath his feet was covered in blood, and some still dripped from his soaked hiking boots. His chin rested on his chest, but it looked as if his eyes were still open, staring blankly down at the trail a few feet in front of him. Haley whimpered and coughed and spit what I realized was a small amount of vomit she'd thrown up into her mouth.
Oh, Christ,
I said.
Oh, God.
Kyler moved suddenly, his upper body jerking to the left while his legs jerked to the right. This opened up the massive gash in his stomach, causing the rest of his intestines and other blood, slippery internal organs to spill out in a macabre avalanche. Knowing I could do nothing else but run, I spun around and started up the trail. But as I did, something jumped up from the ground just in front of me. I realized only after I was flying through the air that it was a tripwire. I dropped the camera and the rock on reflex to break my fall. Something hit me in the back of the head as I tried to get up. I fell back down. Haley screamed, and I looked through blurry eyes to see the creature from the ghost town attacking her. Its melted body seemed to shimmer, rubbery skin reflecting the light from Haley's phone, which she still held in one hand despite the creature being on top of her. As I caught another glimpse of those eyes, I realized why they were familiar, and I remembered where I had seen them before. Then a second figure stepped in front of me, and I stared up at him in shock.
Milo?
I asked, just a split second before he smacked me in the side of the head with a branch. An icy breeze seemed to flow constantly through the old mine shaft. I could tell by the echoes and the earthly smell and the feeling of closeness that we were in the mine. That, and the fact that I was being shoved along in a mine cart. My hands were tied tight behind my back. My legs were tied together, and I had a hood over my head. Haley's whimpers came from somewhere in front of me. I came out of my head injury stupor slowly, memories of past shoots floating through my mind. About a year ago, shortly after we hired Milo on, we'd done an episode in an abandoned blast furnace in Pennsylvania. For the episode, Milo had crafted a rodent-like costume that Largo had worn. That's where I recognized the eyes from. That's where I'd seen them before. Apparently, Milo had reused them to create this bear creature costume. So Milo was behind this. He had faked getting attacked in the sawmill. Ever since, he had been running around in the dark, orchestrating this whole thing. There was only one thing I didn't know. Who the hell was in the creature costume? For a moment, I thought it was Largo. After all, I hadn't seen him die with my own eyes, but I quickly dismissed that thought, remembering how real his head felt. No, it wasn't Largo. He was dead. It was someone else. As the minecart I was in slowed and then stopped, I got quickly to my knees and doubled over, shaking my head until the hood fell off. I glanced up to see that we were in a large section of the mine, near the top of a crest. Battery-powered work lights made the place as bright as a supermarket. It looked as if the miners from way back when had broken into a pre-existing cavern with a high ceiling. Milo was ahead of me, leaned over a second minecart. He was fixing a noose around Haley's neck while she sat hooded and whimpering in the minecart. The other end of the rope was affixed to a small device on the ceiling overhead. As I looked closer, I realized the device the rope was attached to was itself attached to a metal cable that ran over the minecart tracks, like a zipline cable. I followed the cable with my eyes and saw that it ended directly over what looked like a broken minecart track bridge. The broken bridge had been built over a crevasse about 20 feet wide. The tracks on this side stuck out a few feet over that dark hole before terminating. The reality of what Milo was planning settled on me with all the comfort of a coat made of fire ants. Milo would shove the minecart, with Haley in it, down the gentle slope and toward the broken bridge. Once the cart had reached the chasm, the runner above would stop. The minecart would fall into the pit, but Haley wouldn't. She would fall maybe a foot into the crevasse before the rope went taut again, but I doubted it would break her neck. It seemed like a lot of trouble just to hang someone. I sensed movement to my left and looked over to see the bear creature standing directly beside me.
Boo!
A man's voice issued from somewhere inside the costume, causing me to flinch. The creature stood up and removed his head, revealing the head of a blonde-haired man with wide eyes, puffy cheeks, and thick lips. He guffawed as he looked at me.
About shit your pants, didn't you?
This had drawn Milo's attention, who looked over at us.
Hey, Heath.
He said to me in his studious, sincere voice.
How's it hanging? Have you enjoyed the show so far? Best one yet, right?
Haley turned to look at us. The noose around her neck caused her cheeks to bunch up over her jaw. She had tape over her mouth, a swollen shut left eye, and blood coming from both nostrils, creating dark runnels over the silver tape. The fear I saw in her face hit me like a hammer blow, and I suddenly came back to my senses, surprised I had been so coldly analytical when looking at the noose and the zipline runner. I lurched toward the big blonde man, but since I didn't have the use of my hands, I lashed my head out toward him, hoping to headbutt him. He was too quick, stepping back easily and tossing the costume head down and then punching me in the jaw before I could even compute what was happening. Blood seeped into my mouth as pain erupted in the side of my face. Several of my teeth were out of position, and the inside of my cheek felt like it had been attacked with a cheese grater. I fell back into the minecart, barely able to see over the lip with dazed eyes. Milo studied me for a moment and then shook his head.
Okay, she's ready, Dersham.
The blonde guy, Dersham, switched spots with Milo. The small-statured 18-year-old stood next to my minecart, watching as Dersham grabbed Haley's. He leaned over, flexed, and shoved the cart as hard as he could, which was plenty hard. Haley screamed against the duct tape as the cart wheeled noisily down the slope, picking up a little more speed as it went toward the broken bridge. I shouted and threw myself against the front of the minecart, but it was an ineffectual reaction, and Milo knew it. Dersham stepped off the track and moved to the side, taking a couple of steps down the rocky slope. The rope followed along on the runner overhead as Haley approached the drop-off. Then it went taut as the minecart tumbled off the track and down into the crevasse. In a split second of pure horror, I realized Milo had also tied a rope around Haley's legs, the other end of which he tied to the cart itself. So as the cart fell into the black maw, the rope around her neck yanked, but probably not hard enough to kill her. A half second later, the cart had fallen far enough to yank on the rope tied around her legs, and the cart was heavy. There was a popping sound, and Haley's head came off. Or, rather, her head stayed where it was, and her body came off. The weight of the minecart completely severing her spine like it was made of old sun-rotted twine. Soon, her body was gone from view, falling into the pit. Her head swung for a moment, the weight of her skull causing the head to flip over, hanging upside down before it, too, fell into the chasm. Dersham and Milo stared at the swinging noose for a long moment while I fell back into the minecart and threw up on myself.
Holy shit!
Milo said.
That was amazing! I didn't really expect her head to pop off like that. Woo!
Do you think we got it? Dersham said.
Oh, we got it. From 3 different angles we got it. Fuck yeah, man. Best abandoned haunts video yet.
I suddenly realized what Milo was planning. I got back up to my knees and looked down at the well-lighted broken bridge. I hadn't noticed the tripod set up to the side before, but I saw it now. And there was another one on the right side of the track. A third was set up partway up the slope. There were 3 cameras.
You're going to post this on our channel?
I asked him. Milo looked at me like I was a mentally challenged infant.
Yeah, of course.
It'll get taken down.
Oh, sure, eventually. But not until it's all over the internet. People will think it's fake at first, of course. After all, this is the kind of stuff we do. Maybe not this graphic, but it's what we do. By the time anyone figures out it's real, it'll be too late. I told you, practical is always better. And there's nothing more practical than the real fucking thing.
Now him,
Dersham said, grabbing the swinging noose with a hooked branch, like an overlarge cane, and pulling it back in.
Okay, but I gotta get him ready first,
Milo said.
We'll do 1 leg and both arms this time.
Dersham smiled.
His arms will rip out.
I don't know,
Milo said with a similar smile.
I think the arms might hold. I think the leg will rip off. If we did both legs, sure, no question. His arms would come off. But 1 leg? I'm guessing the arms will hold. That's my bet.
Fine,
Dersham said.
Let's just do it.
Who the fuck is this guy? I asked, gesturing at Dersham.
He's my friend,
Milo said with a pout.
my partner.
It took the 2 of them 10 minutes to get my arms tied to the rope attached to the zip line overhead, mostly because I fought back any chance I got. By the time they had another rope attached to my right leg and the minecart, I had a broken nose, several missing teeth, and my left eye was swelling shut. There wasn't enough slack in the rope to bring my hands down past my chest, so I sat in the minecart with my arms cocked in front of my face.
Good?
Milo asked as he finished securing my wrists.
Yeah.
Dersham said, finishing up with my right ankle.
Wait,
I pleaded.
just wait. I never did anything to you, Milo. I was always nice to you, wasn't I?
Milo's eyes went wide behind his smudged glasses.
Is that what you think this is about? Some kind of revenge or something?
He shook his head.
No, my friend. You've got it all wrong. Okay, so what's it all about?
I asked.
Why are you doing this?
Milo looked at me with those wide eyes for a good, long time. So long his eyes went out of focus. And while he looked at me, I was busy trying to work some slack into the rope around my right leg with the toe of my left boot. It didn't seem to be working. Finally, Milo smiled and his eyes came back into focus.
Does a guy need a reason to kill?
Dersham bellowed out laughter as he got behind the cart and gave it a good shove. Suddenly, I was barreling toward the broken bridge, the runner skimming along the wire overhead. I screamed as I neared the end of the track. Then my arms were yanked up over my head and the cart was falling into the dark crevasse, and my scream cut off as my right leg was wrenched by the cart. I heard something snap and tear, but it was like I was hearing it happen to another person. There was no pain. Not right away. I swung above the crevasse, thinking I was dead, until I heard Milo and Dersham arguing. Finally, I put my chin on my chest and looked down. I still had my right leg. It hadn't been ripped off. But my right foot was gone. I bent the leg at the knee and looked at the place where my foot should have been. The gory stub there poured blood, which quickly disappeared into the darkness below.
I knew I should have tied it.
Milo said.
I told you to get it tight on the leg, not the ankle. Get him back in here. We'll do it again.
The pain came suddenly and with the force of a freight train. It was so breathtakingly shocking that I couldn't scream. I couldn't do anything but swing there by my arms, the runner on the wire above moving a little with each swing, back and forth, away from the stop, and then back to it. Then Dersham was there with his stick, pulling me back toward him while Milo fussed at him from up at the top of the slope, talking about how they'd have to go get another minecart from near the mine entrance. Maybe that was why Dersham was distracted. Maybe it was because he thought I was too injured, too in shock to do anything. Whatever the cause, he gave me an opening, and I took it. As he lowered the curved stick and reached one hand out to grab me by an upstretched arm, I kicked both legs out, one to either side, and hooked them around the backs of his knees. Unbearable pain erupted from my bloody nub as my right calf made contact with the back of his left knee. Dersham, standing as he was on the edge of the chasm, felt this. He jerked back, letting go of me and whipping his upper body back away from the deadly drop. As he jerked away from me, I yanked my legs back, pulling with my arms and shifting my hips. Dersham tried to step back, lifting one foot off the rocky ground, but instead of moving his leg backward, my intervention caused it to whip forward and up. With only one leg on the ground and his upper body moving backward, Dersham fell back, twisting, turning, trying to get away from the edge of the chasm. But I had done enough. I had pulled his legs enough, and as I swung back out over the black maw, Dersham's torso hit the edge of the pit. The weight of his legs pulled him back into the crevasse as his arms scrambled for purchase. Milo was suddenly there, on his knees next to the edge of the pit, grabbing Dersham's wrists. Dismay darkened my heart as I swung, shoulder joints aching madly, sickening pain radiating from my still bleeding ankle joint.
I got you!
Milo yelled, gripping Dersham's wrists. But Dersham was still panicking, kicking his legs frantically on the vertical wall of the pit. As a result, he continued to slide backward until his armpits were flush against the edge of the chasm.
Stop kicking!
Milo yelled. Dersham shifted his grip, reversing his hands from the gritty ground so he was grabbing Milo's forearms. Milo shifted down so he was lying on his stomach, his body acting as a counterweight. But Dersham was still kicking.
Hey, Dersh!
Milo said and not quite yell.
It's okay. I got you. Stop kicking.
Dersham's legs slowed and then stopped. There was really no great area for purchase. I could see from where I hung out over the maw. The wall wasn't smooth, but there were no shelves large enough or horizontal enough to provide a foothold. So Dersham rested his feet as best he could on downward jutting crags, taking at least a minuscule amount of his weight off the much smaller Milo.
Okay,
Milo said, panting.
now, I want you to ease one leg up and over the lip here. Do you think you can do that?
Dersham nodded, his chin nearly hitting the rocky ground between his outstretched arms.
Now listen to me, Dersh.
Milo said.
I mean, ease it up. Don't throw it up. If you make a fast movement, you're liable to fall because I don't weigh nearly what you do, okay? Slow movements only. Slow. We'll get you up. I promise.
I blinked, my eyes suddenly burning with sweat. I was finding it harder and harder to keep my mind on track. I was losing too much blood. Still, I managed to think one thing repeatedly while Milo talked. Fall, 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 you bastards, fall.
Okay,
Milo said, shifting his hips back away from the edge as best he could, and then digging the toes of his boots into the hard, gritty ground. There wasn't much purchase there at all, but it was all he could do.
go ahead.
Dersham eased his right leg up, bending it slowly. But the shift was enough to drag him and Milo an inch or two closer to the edge.
Wait!
Milo said.
Wait! Put your foot back where it was!
Dersham did as he was told. Milo licked his lips and looked around, glancing up at me briefly but not really seeing me. Then he looked back at Dersham.
Okay, listen. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to let go of my arms and—
No!
Dersham cried.
I'll fall!
You won't fall, Dersh. I promise. All you need to do is hold on while I get a rope. I can loop the rope around one of these support beams and then help pull you up.
Dersham shook his head violently, which caused his left foot to slip off its tentative hold. Both men slid away from safety.
Dersh!
Milo cried. But Dersh wasn't listening. He was panicking again. He started kicking his feet, trying to find purchase, his fingers digging into Milo's forearms. They slid some more, and Milo jerked himself up, pulling his knees under him to try and slow the slide.
Dersh, stop!
They slid more. Fall, 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 you bastards, fall! Milo cried. Dersham screamed for help. Then there was no saving them. Dersham was too heavy, Milo too light. They slid into the chasm, Dersham going feet first and Milo going head first. Then I was watching them fall, Dersham still clasping Milo's forearms. They were shouting, screaming, crying. They disappeared into the sharp darkness. A moment later, I heard the crunch of them hitting the bottom. I let out a harsh bark of laughter as I looked down into the blackness. Then I rallied my strength and worked my way back along the zip line by jerking myself up with my arms and whipping them forward to move the runner back towards safety. When my one remaining foot finally touched the ground between the minecart tracks, I lost consciousness. It couldn't have been for long, but it was enough to make me realize I was running out of energy. Standing there, a foot or so from the chasm, I lifted my right leg and pressed the bloody nub against the inside of my left calf to slow the bleeding. The pain I felt was only second to the pain that came shortly after the foot had been ripped off. I'm not ashamed to admit that I stood there and cried for a little while. I thought about how much it would take for me to make it off the mountain alive, and I cried. I didn't think I could do it. I still don't, but I'm going to try. I guess I didn't really need to tell you about all that stuff with Milo and Dersham. You saw all that. You saw what they did to Haley, what they did to me. You saw them fall. You saw me work my way over here. You saw me try to get my hands out of these goddamn ropes. You saw me search for something that could help me out of them. At least, I'm guessing you saw. For all I know, this camera I'm talking into now was zoomed in on the broken bridge behind me. Zoomed in to capture the disgusting execution of Haley and the attempted execution of me. I don't know. I can't see the display screen to know what all this camera is capturing. But one thing I do know is it's capturing audio. So that's why I'm doing this. It's important that you know what happened. Because if I die up here, there needs to be a record of what exactly happened. I know someone will come looking, eventually. We told several people we would be coming up here, but they won't expect us back for a day or two yet. So that's why I'm telling you this. Well, that and the fact that I don't have any energy to do anything else. I can't get out of these goddamn ropes, and my leg is still bleeding pretty good. But telling the story has helped keep me from giving up. It has helped keep me sane for at least a little while longer. But I'm tired now. I'm really tired. And it's a tiredness I've never felt before. It feels final. So I think I'll go to sleep for a while. I think it'll be a long while. But I'm tired. And I've tried everything I can think of, but the ropes are just too fucking tight. And without my hands. Anyway, that's the story. That's what happened. I can hardly keep my eyes open anymore. But maybe, if I wake up, I'll find a way out of here. Maybe.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out some more of my episodes here.